Interesting event together. And I think, as all of you here will recognize, Forum 2000 has become an extremely important event internationally. It's one of the few places where people can actually talk with open minds about the issues which are perhaps too general and too important ever to be addressed by politicians. And of course, today the Aspen Foundation has joined in to make this particular concentrated attempt at understanding the problem of the city. Now, on this panel, you will see Pablo Otaola, who's an urban planner with experience in many important Spanish towns, notably San Sebastian and Bilbao, where he currently works advising the town council and on planning projects of his own. Then next to him, Eva Żyzyczna, who is an architect with distinguished practices in both Prague and London, who has made her mark certainly on my city. Then Dr. Tomáš Hudeček, who is known to all of you, I'm sure, as the Lord Mayor of Prague, and who is a graduate of the Pražské University at Olomouc, and now a full-time politician. And then Jiří Deváth, who is General Director of Cisco in the Czech Republic, a firm which has concentrated on information technology matters and developing information security for the town of Prague, among many other projects. So I'll just say a few general things about why this topic is important. It's a huge topic which spreads into lots of different areas, but we all know that the city is perhaps one of our most important possessions. In fact, in my view, it is the greatest human achievement. Nothing else compares with it as an exercise in durable cooperation and peaceable settlement. And it's so much with us that we don't tend to ask ourselves just how extraordinary it is that it exists, very much like the human being itself. For that reason, the destruction of a city is a tragedy far greater than the destruction of its residents. If you think of the great turning points in history, the destruction of Rome, the destruction of Baghdad by the Mongol hordes, which destroyed Islamic civilization, and Islamic civilization has never recovered, and that's what we're living through today in the Middle East. The destruction of Constantinople by Mehmet II, which just reinforced the chaos in that area. The destruction of the German cities after the war, and also the destruction of Middle Eastern cities today. I think not many people know that when Mohammed Atta flew that jet into the World Trade Center, it was partly the final effect of a long-term sense of distress about what has been done to the Middle East by development, architecture, and all the rest, all the ways in which things had changed. He had done a thesis on the city of Aleppo in the German university on how to conserve it, how to conserve the Muslim city in general, and Aleppo in particular. He was somebody suffering from the kind of sense of isolation and loneliness that comes from seeing your inherited environment destroyed. Of course, Aleppo has since been completely destroyed, despite everything, and in fact most of Syria probably before this is over. And we all know that this is going to have huge consequences. These places which were settled, places where communities had been for centuries, will now be places through which nomads wander in search of a home and don't find it. So the city is a unique example of a human attempt to settle. And like everything, it must adapt if it is to survive. And that is the question I think that we're going to be discussing. How does the city adapt to the modern world? How does it effectively transform itself so as still to be a successful habitat for the kind of peculiar creatures that we have become? And there are many questions. There's a question of how the city should govern itself. What form of democracy, if it is democracy, is appropriate to a city? How do we maintain the fabric of a city? In America, for example, as I think many of you will have had experience, cities hardly exist anymore. They grow up in the center, they grow up and they grow up, and then suddenly there's nothing there. There's huge suburbs disappearing into the distance, but in the center there is nothing, empty after 5 o'clock every day. You know, and America is becoming a country of suburbs. And many people feel that this is something that we should avoid. We in Europe, we are a civilization of cities, and the very word indicates that. It's cognate with the idea of civilization and the idea of the citizen. Many cities across the world are becoming bankrupt. So there's a huge financial question. How does a city manage its resources when it has to operate as an independent economic entity in a world where multinationals and so on seem to dictate the terms of exchange? And in America, this has become a major problem. Cities are not just empty, they're also bankrupt. They're empty of money too. And many people feel, gosh, that we've got to do something to prevent that being the normal outcome. Then there are the questions of the urban fabric. How should it develop? Here in Prague, you are lucky to live in what is this perhaps either the most beautiful city in the world or the one that's second most beautiful after Venice. And there's a real question as to how you conserve that beauty while adapting to the modern world. What sort of architecture is required? How do you make it fit in, or should it not, perhaps not fit in, but stand out? And we've had major questions about this in our part of the world. When first Richard Rogers and Renzo Piano built the Centre Beaubourg in Paris, it was for the first time that Le Corbusier's idea that you can flatten whole neighborhoods in the middle of an ancient city and make it more adaptable. It was the first time that that was put into practice. I don't know any Parisian who likes the result, but nevertheless, there is a question there as to how one should put a modern complex in the middle of one of these closely knit fabrics that we've inherited. And then who should decide on this? Who should decide how things go, how things are built, and where? Again, if you take the television tower in Prague, a wonderful example of a wonderful achievement of the communist government in desecrating the entire skyline of the city. You know, who decided that? And what would the Prague citizens have decided had they been given the choice? And should they have been given the choice, given their ignorance, and so on? And which comes first in the development of a city, aesthetics or function? Can we distinguish aesthetics and function? And how do we fit the fabric that we've inherited and the life that we've inherited, the life of the past, into the life of the future in which our children will be, we hope, at home? Now, those are all some of the questions, and I'm going to leave it now to the panel to put before you. They're allowed 7 minutes each, then there'll be a little panel discussion, and I hope the time to throw it open to the audience so that you can make your interventions in due course. So I invite Pablo Otaola to begin with some reflections on his experience in Bilbao.
Thank you, Roger. I'm very honored to be part of this Forum 2000 and especially of this panel. As Roger has said, I want to share with you some ideas about my experience in Bilbao in planning and governance. And I will start with the same idea as Roger, that cities are very important. Most of the world population live in cities, and as far as Europe is, 80% live in cities, and if you see, most of it in mediums and small-sized cities. I don't know if you know Jaime Lerner, an architect and a former ex-mayor of Curitiba. He said something I really appreciate, that cities are not the problem but the solution. And this is because I really believe in cities, as Roger has said before. Urban planning is crucial to make these cities work. And I have brought here some ideas of the European Union that I like, especially the need to have multi-center cities, that we have to use resources efficiently, especially at the metropolitan area, and restrict the use of more land. We have to redevelop our cities within ourselves. This summer I read a very interesting book, The Planning Game by Alexander Garvin, that shows what are the actors on the planning game, what he calls, and he studies 4 examples: Paris, Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia, and how were the big changes on them, and who were the actors. And it's very interesting to see that in Paris it was an autocratic king, but there was a very good technician, Baron Haussmann. In Chicago, there was a very good architect, Daniel Burnham, and the civil society. So the actors change, but there is a lot. And those could be some of the elements of planning. And the actors, for me, or the main actors, are politicians, of course, that we have elected. They have to carry the leadership. The technicians, we are supposed to be the experts and to have the knowledge to do. Civil society, neighbors association, and finally the citizens, who are the ones who are going to leave the city. And the question for me is how we make the balance between all of them. But also, it depends on the territory, because the cities have metropolitan areas, the city itself, and the cities are divided in districts. And I think for each territory, we need to have different strategy. Most of our cities belong to a metropolitan area. And what happened, at least in Spain or in Bilbao, is that each city wants to have a swimming pool, a theater, a museum, no matter whether they are linked or very close to another city. The efficient use of the resources is very important, and it should be at the metropolitan area. And this for that, at least in Spain, we lack metropolitan authorities. This is, for me, something very important that we need to put up to try to rationalize this. For me, the principal actors of the metropolitan area are politicians and technicians, because this is not so much a matter for citizens. This is to show you an image of the metropolitan areas in Spain, and the case of Bilbao, which is, we have 30 municipalities and a little bit less than 1 million, all along the river. But if you see, it's an urban continuum, so we have to share, and we don't do it properly, we have to share services and facilities. The city is the more normal or more usual territory. There is where the master plan are made. There is an authority, the mayor and his board. But in this case, one important point for me is that medium-sized cities for me, are the future metropolis and medium-sized cities. In this case, all the actors should participate, but the thing is how they must do it. This is the master plan of Bilbao, but the city is divided in districts, and all the cities. And this is, I'm going back to the European Union program. They ask about multi-central cities development. And this is on the district where the neighbor life is, and where the neighbor decisions are, where the sense of belonging. And normally what we do in our cities is, and at least is in Spain, we work very much on the city center, but we don't work so much on the periphery, on the suburbs. And I think it's important to create a political organization also in these districts, and to promote the creation of what I call hearts of the city centers. We normally all the city goes to the city center for fun, for restaurants, sometimes for shopping, and I think we should develop with equipment and with economic activity all our districts. I think one of our main things to do as a planners is to develop districts. One image of Bilbao. So, how I see citizens' participation? It depends on the territory, as I said. It depends, but one thing is that we don't know how to participate, and our politicians they don't say to us what is the frame and the scope of the, where we can decide and where we cannot decide. So it's very important that we define this to know where and when we have to think. And now I'm going to show you 3 cases of Bilbao. First is the transformation we did in the 90s of the last century. The situation of Bilbao was, at the end of the 80s, was very bad. Unemployment went up to 30%. So there was a need of a global change. In this case, we work with political consensus, the work together of all the administrations. So it was really a process up-bottom, not what now it's orthodoxial. But there was a need to do things, and there was not a very hard opposition to the projects. This is an example of how politicians from the state, from the region, from the province, and from the municipality to mayors, in fact, and different political parties share together and create this company where they all mix, they are all together, and this was the company who did all the urban renewal of Bilbao in the 90s and for the last 20 years. And an example, I'm pointing this because normally we all have to think about citizen participation, but I believe there are projects that need leadership, and the example of the Guggenheim Museum is one. Now everybody in Bilbao is happy to have the Guggenheim Museum, but if we have made a referendum in the beginning of the 90s, for sure it will be 70-30 or 20 or 80-20 against the museum. Nobody wanted. We were an industrialized area, so people wanted another industry. They didn't believe in that. So thank you for the leadership of our politicians in that time that were clever enough and hard enough. We have the Guggenheim. Another example is now it's an urban project. Now in Bilbao the situation is much better, in spite of the crisis that we have in Spain, but it's not so hard. And this is a project to transform an industrial peninsula in an urban space. It's a public-private project. We still have a consensus, but in this case we have had a lot of discussions. It's another time, and we have made many changes on the master plan. I'm going, first the thing we did when Zaha Hadid designed the master plan was to show it to the public and to start discussing with it. And in this case, in this area, there is an existing district where 500 people live, and we have, with a very active neighborhood association. So we have been discussing with them, and the result is that they have made changes on the master plan. We are maintaining their buildings and even giving money for their rehabilitation, and they are designing all the space around their houses. So in this case, we have worked close to the neighbors and thinking in a good way. And finally, an example of the civil society that I like a lot is a local association, a local cultural association who wanted to develop art during the process of the transformation and to create a small center of creativity using abandoned industrial buildings, even if they are not especially nice, but they put there a space for young creators, and it was a meeting place for all the young people in Bilbao with flexible uses like a workshop for artists or weekend gallery for local artists, depending, and also permanent uses like a theater and a jazz club that they are for minority artists. And to end, conclusions. Importance of the cities, urban planning is necessary, depending strategies according to the territory. For me, it's very important to create organizations and also to have a multidisciplinary approach. And more concrete on citizen participation, I think we need more urban democracy. Still, we have something to do. I'm talking about Spain. We have to define the frame where this is going to do and make a balance between all the actors. And also, and especially, put much more emphasis on districts. And finally, I think that we all need to learn how to participate.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Pablo. I've been very tolerant and allowed you to go on for about 15 minutes, only because you had so many interesting things to say. So the rest of you should not take that as a precedent. Okay, so Tomáš Hudeček, if I could ask you just to give some comments on your position as Mayor of Prague, that would be very useful.
Oh yeah, so I'll be the first with the microphone. Okay. So good morning, my name is Tomáš Hudeček and I'm this time Mayor of Prague, and you must believe me that I'm the mayor. I am so young. All people telling me that I'm so young, but I'm not the youngest one as a mayor in Europe, as a mayor of capital city. The youngest one is in La Valletta in Malta. He's 34 and he was born on 29th of December 1979. And I was born in May 1979, so he's a half year younger than me, so it's not so bad. Yeah. But I think the whole Malta has the number of inhabitants which is similar as Brno, the whole Malta, so it's not the same as Prague. Yeah. I'll be a little bit shorter than my colleague Paolo, but I would like to say. And it's probably interesting for you, main problems of Prague and our attitude to these problems and some solution which we would like to do. And because it's not so long ago, I was a teacher. I'm still a teacher at the university, but I was paid by university. Nowadays I'm paid by the city hall. And I like these panels and this conference because it brings some new ideas and it brings usually some principles which we can use in our work. And but I would like to start with the situation of Prague. So we have some problems, but the problems are not so visible. We have a big problem with budget. We have 0 crowns. Honestly, we have 30 billion crowns debt, just as a city. Then other 8 billion crowns debt as a transport company, and the whole budget is equal to this debt, so it's 38 billion crowns. So we are in a little worse state as our country, because you know that our debt as a country is not 100% of our budget. We also have some problems with bureaucracy, but it's normal in Czech Republic. This is nothing unusual in Prague. But if you want to solve anything as a normal people, a normal person in Prague, you need to go to the city hall and solve a lot of problems with officers and cashier accountants at the city hall. So this is, I think, normal, not so special in Prague. And we made some analysis, plural, and there is a list that people in Prague feel problems in the way of transport, public areas, and safety. So this is 3 main topics we should solve if we want to put Prague in some charts. I think Mercer is the company who is doing these charts, and Prague is now 73rd, and Vienna in Austria is first as a city in this chart. So we are on 73rd place, so it's not so nice in comparison to such a similar city, Vienna in Austria. So our priorities are public areas because there's connection with safety, there's connection with cleanliness, with livable cities. So It's just 2 words, public areas, but it consists of a lot of problems, a lot of solutions, and also a lot of money. So we need to make something with our budget if we want to have better place for our public areas. Then the second topic is safety, of course. Not just the number of policemen outside the buildings, but also the problem with homeless people, etc. And third priority, our priority is education, which is a little bit connected with the situation of education in the whole Czech Republic, because you know that if you change something in the education system, the result will come after 20 years. So it's not visible immediately. It's after many, many years when you can come with some results, sometimes positive, in Czech Republic mainly negative, I think. But this is something, it's not official, but I needed to say these problems and our solution, but something my personal. Do I have a time still?
A couple of minutes.
Couple of minutes, okay, so couple is 2. Okay, used to be. We would like also solve and use some natural principles. For example, all of us tend to take care mainly about ourselves. Like we would like to have warm water, hot water. We would like to have refrigerator, and we would like to have clean room, clean flat. This is our attention, our focus on 100%. Then we have some time for taking care about some local area. I mean, for example, the garden in front of your house. This, I don't know, 10 square meters, maybe 20, maybe 100 square meters, you are taking care for, I don't know, 80%, 70%. Then you have some opinion about a larger area, like part of the city. And of course, if you are highly educated, you have a lot of money, you have a lot of time, you are thinking about the situation in Afghanistan, as Mr. Horníček said 2 decades ago. And this is a natural principle. So if we will be able to use this principle in, for example, taking care about local areas, about public areas, because if the closest area around your house is nice, the price of your house is definitely higher than if the closest area is full of homeless people and not so clean, etc. And also the companies. If you have a company and you are selling some, I don't know, some refrigerators or cars or what is it, you would like to have your company, your windows in front of the park, for example. So you want to have something nice around your shop. So you are able to spend some money for having nice your local areas, and also for inhabitants, also for owners of the property, also for companies, etc. And when I was in New York last year, and it was in summer, they established something like, they call it groups. It's probably NGO or the group of companies, owners of some property, inhabitants. In Manhattan, there are, I think, 14 or 15 of these groups. It's something like of our Prague 1, Prague 2, Prague 3, but it's not an institution, it's NGO. And the New York City Hall spent some money, give some money to these groups. So, for example, a group which is responsible for the area, I don't know, in Prague, around Jofín here, consists of some inhabitants who are living in this house, and some companies who are selling some goods in the lower floor, take some money from the City Hall, also use their own money, and they use all this money for developing the local area. And this is a natural principle and it's logical. But in Prague it's not logical and it's not natural. And I would like to use also these principles in our as a mayor in my role. So this is one theory, and I would like it will be in a practice early. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That's very interesting. Now I'll ask Jiří Divat to add his reflections from the point of view of a major multinational company.
Thank you very much, Roger. Good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. And even though you may think that I'm a kind of alien, extraterrestrial among this group, I'm not representing any city, I'm not representing architects and a urban planner, I'm representing technologies, information and communication technologies. Well, at the beginning, I guess that at least we can agree on one thing, that information and communication technologies have penetrated our entire life. They are present everywhere, even now in this moment. This discussion is streamed to the internet. Some of you are taking the notes, which may be immediately synchronized and saved somewhere in the cloud. And maybe some of you are even tweeting from this discussion. So ICT is everywhere, but the question is how information and communications technologies may contribute to transformation of the cities. And definitely they can. Since the beginning of this century, we have been talking, the tech geeks, we are talking about so-called smart cities. It doesn't mean that the cities before were stupid. It's just the way how we can contribute to better integration of the functions of the city, better governance of the cities. And that was the trend over the last 10 years. How can, for example, Prague can better integrate response systems and physical safety together, how can connect fire brigade with medical emergency and with the police, how we can increase because of those technologies, improve the life of the citizens, increase their physical security, improve the access to the services of the municipality. That was the trend over the last 10 years, and I could mention many more examples of this integration, of this smartness, of this trend of becoming the smart cities. But I see even transition in what we call the smart cities today, because now I would say more than discussing a better governance of the city itself, that has been accepted as the trend or even necessity today, we are talking more about the smart communities. And what I mean by smart communities, it's more about government to citizen, constant relationship, how to build up the relationship, how to be more connected to the citizens. And I mean like 24/7, not just from the opening hour till the close in the office, and basically everywhere, how the citizen of the city can, from this Joffin Island, be connected to the Lord Mayor, or at least to his office, and solve some of his problem or her problem in the real life. And then definitely, if we talk about the smart communities, the integration and connection between citizens itself, well, we see the trend in the real life. I do not want to make a poll here, but I'm pretty sure that many of you are at least member of one social community on the internet. Definitely I am. I'm connecting with my friends, with my ex-schoolmates. I connect also with my neighbors. I'm living on Prague 6, so I have a bunch of friends from Prague 6, and we are all members of a community on the social network, and we are definitely building up a kind of mind trust, I would say, opinion, how we want to have our city to be built, what functions we want, and so on. So it's becoming more in the smart communities. Why it's so important to really help the city to transform through information and communications technologies to also provide this government to citizen or government to community services and be together. Well, we've heard a fantastic example of Bilbao transforming the city in its fundament, its basis, its infrastructure in the modern times. But the city is the living animal. It's the organism which lives today, and obviously Bilbao, and definitely not Prague, cannot transform in terms of urban planning to the functions every 5 or 10 years. It's impossible. But definitely the soul of the city, the way how the city lives, can transform very rapidly. And we see that in Prague with all the markets now opening, with the things like city running, city races in running, and so on and so on. And definitely information and communications technologies may be the glue between the city, its physical fundament, and its citizens, its community. So that's our challenge and aspiration, and I look forward to give you more examples later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now, time to Eva Jedrzejczyk to conclude our first deliberations.
Well, what an easy task to do so. Well, I think that I said I was going to talk at the end only because this is usually in practical life. Architects usually come at the end of the story, so the planners and the politicians and the economy, and these days communication, they form the basis. And then at the end of the chain, or at the end of this octopus, there is an architect who creates the detail. Of course, I think that it's a complex process that architects get much more involved now in the back communication, because then they have to back inform all those people in the chain so that the circle gets eventually closed. But I can't actually, resist when Roger was talking in his very beautiful introduction, when he finished with Richard Rogers, who built one of the most famous architectural monuments in Paris. It was the most significant urban action which happened in, I think, at post-war architecture. And he says if any Parisian likes his building, that is a question of something of that kind. This is how architects usually finish, because the only visible part of all this process is the actual building at the end and the detail. Because what the planners do is not so visible. It's what the communication does. People know about it, and that is really a very positive part of our life, that we communicate back what everybody thinks, not only in this country, not only in this town, but all over the world. We actually know what's going on. We have got television, we have got Facebook, we have got Twitter, we have got means, to find out, if we want to, what is happening, and then we can feed back what our needs are and what effect we can actually, or how we can actually affect the present life around us. Well, because I'm probably the oldest person in the audience, so I think that I just go back very quickly. About 1965, I was sitting just further down the road in Manes, and there was an architect called Sal, who was, as a member of Communist Party, able to go to see Brasilia. Brasilia was just about to be finished with the Czech name Kubíček in hand, and the best architect of that period of time, Oskar Niemeyer. For us as students, that was something which we dreamt about, create a new city. It didn't go too far from Corbusier, who I always wanted to do. And when I read 900-page biography of Corbusier, I found out that his only dream and his only interest in his architecture creative process was to rebuild towns. The buildings which he built and which we grossly admire, for him, it was not an achievement. He just wanted to do all those urban changes. My goodness me, what a disaster it would have been had he actually succeeded. And the same with Brasilia. And when I managed to get out of this country, and I think that in 1990s, early 1990s, I actually went to see Brasilia in its own. It is a dead city, beautiful buildings, the most beautiful buildings of that period which one could imagine. But the real Brasilia is elsewhere. The real city actually grew up outside the city. To build a new city for an architect, for the planners, it is at the moment almost an impossible task. Maybe it will be possible, and of course there are different cities which are expanding and there would be new precincts. When I studied architecture, it was when the outskirts of Prague was being built, all those concrete jungles, and it was being presented as the only way how to accommodate the need for the social housing, for the housing. Well, I call it social housing at that time. It wasn't, of course, social housing. During the communism, it wasn't anything of this kind. But I come to London in 1968. London was not as it is now. The changes which happened to London are absolutely incredible. Now, what I would like to mention in 7 minutes, it's such a short period of time, but it's 3 now. Okay, so in 3 minutes, so it is. I was working for GLC, which was Greater London Council, working on housing, working on primary schools. It was post-war development and post-war Labour government trying to accommodate X number of houses in a rapid scale. That is what happened all over in Europe. It was done in a different fashion and it finished up as a disaster. And now we are redeveloping the cities. And now I would like to say in 3 minutes 2 things. I think that number one, I think that there is a great importance, which I think is in conservation and reconstruction, because before we start damaging and drastically, making intervention to the parts of Prague, to the parts of large cities, we have to very carefully assess a possibility of reconstruction and remodernization and so on. The second thing which I would like to say, how one person, one architect, going back to Richard Rogers, because since Roger mentioned it at the beginning, I suddenly remembered one little detail. I worked in his office for 2 years between 1980 and 1982. I worked on Lloyd's building. And Richard Rogers, at that point, had a dream that the South Bank would be a public zone, public realm. And that one, it was practically impossible. For me, it was hard to understand, because in communism, if you wanted to build a road from A to B, you just did it. Of course, in capitalist system, you have to purchase all those little properties. And there was not a single piece of South Bank which was not in somebody else's hands, private hands. And it took 22 years, up to the millennium, before it happened. London has got the South Bank, which is the most exciting part of redevelopment of London City, and I think that which is the most important part of giving to public the era with the reconstruction of Docklands, with all that reconstruction of turning the electric power station, turning the power station into the most modern gallery, Tate Gallery in London, and finishing up with the new construction similar to Bethlehem's Chapel of the first Shakespeare Theatre. So it really, I think it works on so many different levels, but the detail is as important as this grand idea which actually forms the cities. Thank you. 5 minutes, 7 minutes? Have I?
7.5.
Good.
Thank you very much to the panel. Extremely interesting questions have been put before us. I don't think we've got a great deal of time. What I propose to do is to take some questions and observations from the audience, and then perhaps when we have enough of them, we can all conclude, we on the panel, by offering our response to them. I know that the Mayor has to leave us in 10 minutes' time, so I think anybody who has questions addressed to him, which are questions short of an assassination attempt, they would be welcome. There's a lady at the back who is...
Hello, my name is Vladimíra Glacová and I live in the city center. And I run every morning. And I'm really unhappy that all the parks are closed in the morning. They open like 10 o'clock, 10:30. The Luxembourg Garden, which is under the castle, is closed whole for, April. April is the opening time and closing is September. I really don't understand why this is, and it looked like that the city is made for tourists, not for people who live there. Because people who live there and go running, they just do it early morning. And the same thing is, I walk every morning to the office, and all the passages like passage, where you can cross the house and go through the house to another street, they are also closed. Between Michalska and Jilska, there is a little sweet street, but it opens at 10:30. So I would like to know why this is so. I can understand that at night you can close these streets and park, but once the light is on, it would be reasonable to have it accessible. Thank you.
Okay, well, there's a very interesting question from one of those annoying people who get up early. Is there a few more questions? Is there a gentleman over there?
Hello, I have one suggestion and one question. You said that Prague is in debt, but when you think that the city is spending 90 million crowns on reconstruction of Střelecký ostrov, which will turn again to some kind of skanzen and people will not be able to use it promptly, then I would suggest to take a little bit less of money or spend a little bit less money on the reconstruction of Střelecký ostrov and leave it for people to use. But my question is that you started the initiative which is called Ozvučná deska, which actually should help to people or to urban planning and to people to use Prague as a friendly city. And I would like to hear what are the results of this Ozvučná deska group, when the citizens of Prague can actually see and hear what are the results of this group. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. It's a very concrete question. There's a gentleman here, yes?
Hello, my name is Zdeněk Hešt, and I would like to say that I believe the main key of the successful transformation of cities is that we need to bring nature and the trust from the Lord closer to the people. And the church has not been working at this moment the way it should be, because nobody goes to church at the moment. So I believe the church workers should work someplace else where the people go most. Thank you.
Gosh, that's a complicated question, isn't it? Okay. There's one here, yes.
Jaroslav Anděl, Doc Center for Contemporary Art. I have a broader question about this notion of smart cities. I have to ask myself and the panelists how much this notion is related to the narrative of the 90s, the revolution of the internet, because this narrative was maybe most succinctly summarized by bestseller by Thomas Friedman, The World is Flat. Now, 20 years ago, a lot of people bought into this narrative, and now we see that actually the very opposite happened. The world is not flat, the world has become more unequal, and this inequality is really a big, big problem. So I think we should also think about these notions which become slogans and then political device and so on.
I'll take two more questions. A gentleman here and a lady over there, and then.
And I want to ask Mr. Budeček about as you mentioned, it seems that homeless people is an issue for you. You mentioned twice, and I would like to know if your office or the city hall has a plan, or is working on a plan for the future. Is working on a plan for the future concerning homeless people, helping them, or taking care of them, or stuff like that.
The lady over there.
Thank you. I would like to ask Mr. Devat and Mr. Otaola. I really like the idea of smart cities, but I really have to ask, what is the possibility to hack the system, or are we 1% prevented against the cyber terrorism, and is it possible to be endangered by it? Thank you.
Right, well, those are all very interesting questions, and obviously quite a lot of them are addressed to the mayor, who has, unfortunately, 5 minutes before he escapes, so he's got to answer them. First of all, why is everything closed in the morning when the lady gets up to run? Then what are you doing about this waste of money on the Strzelecki Ostrov? And what is the result of the Ostruczna Deszna, etc.? And finally, what are you doing about the homeless? If you can answer those questions, you really are worthwhile as a mayor, but I don't suppose you can.
Yeah, and it seems that it's horrible to have in a panel mayor. Yeah, okay. So I wrote it down, and I don't know why is it closed, but it belongs to small city parts like Prague 1, Prague 2, etc. So I will discuss with them this problem of having closed parks, and about the passage is the same. So it's not public, it's private, but I will start a discussion. So, okay, thank you very much. About the Strzelecki Ostrov, I'd like to be efficient, yeah. About the Strzelecki Ostrov, it's worse than you think, because we spent this money twice, before flood and after flood, so it's horrible. About Ozvučná deska, the question was when the public and the inhabitants, the people in Prague will have some knowledge about it, or what is it? Yeah, it's not for public. The name Ozvučná deska means that someone tell something to the people in Ozvučná deska, and they are saying something back. So it's a special equipment of the council of Prague, and each councillor says some his ideas, some his how can I say it, priorities to the experts in Ozvučná deska, and Ozvučná deska means that they are telling back some response. So it's not for public, but it's on internet, so you can see some results. Nature in the city, yes, of course, I would like to have also nature in the city. Homeless people, yeah, there is a plan of what to do with homeless people in Prague, but don't worry, it's not about, it's not solving the problem. You cannot solve the problem with homeless people. It's principle, concentration of inhabitants in the level of big city like Prague, have the other result as the homeless people. It's logical, and you cannot separate these two processes. So we cannot solve the problem. We can just solving the problem. And of course there is a plan, and we took some part of this plan. During the winter we spent more money than before, and we will see some results. I hope we'll be successful. So 6 questions in 2 minutes.
Very good, yeah. Excellent. Essentially, to summarize, it's all hopeless. But we're learning to live with it. Then there were questions about smart cities. One from the gentleman here about people have bought into the narrative put around in the 90s that somehow the internet and all that is going to flatten the world. Everybody will be in full communication with each other and so on. But one of the results, at least on his view, is that there's been a new forms of inequality emerging. And the lady over there also worried about the extent to which surrendering our store of knowledge and information to the cybersphere is also opening us to new forms of terrorism. I think, Jiří, you should see if you can answer those questions, because they are very important.
Yep, thank you. Well, the first questions about flattening the world and new inequality, I think that's the topic for separate discussion, separate panel, but I try to address that. Fundamentally, I disagree with the gentleman that the penetration of information technologies would lead to higher inequality in the world. Because what I see today, if you would see the statistics, the fastest growing number of internet users are in Africa, in the least developed part of the world. And basically, the access to the information and communication technologies is much easier than 10 or 20 years ago, when we were talking about the digital divide caused by the fact that the price of the computer or price of the mobile phone, not even talking about the smartphones today, was so high that it was possible just for a small portion, a small number of people to really use those technologies. That's not the case anymore. And even we see in the corporate life, we see that the people, employees are coming to the company better equipped with better phones, better computers than what is company, for example, willing to pay, willing to invest into their employees. So access to technologies is very easy today, and I think it's really helping to bring, as I have mentioned, for example, less developed parts of the world like Africa, bring them back to give them opportunity. But there is another effect, and that's the complexity or the whole function, the quality of the devices, and that's causing a different thing. Even though the access to technology is much easier and much broader, I see arising a new digital divide caused by the fact that people, for example, older people, are not able to catch up with the development of those functions. They cannot buy anymore the concept of social networks and all those things. And that's causing another digital divide, not driven by the price of the device or price as the access to technology, but ability to just catch up with the new way how the society lives and works. And that's rather social movement than the technological one. Technology is somehow accelerating that, but it's the social thing, different way how the young people lives, how they get together, how they communicate, and that's causing the divide between the generations much higher than it was before. So, very complex question. I hope I just placed some of the cornerstones on that. In terms of security, lady have asked, yes, that's a problem, but it's not a technological problem. It's rather the problem, and I would, in this case, if we talk about the cybersecurity, I would say that's the task of the governments. Because if we think today in the physical world, we know what are the rules, what are the laws. I know how to recognize on the street the person which is behaving against the law, which is somehow acting like a criminal. But we know what to do. We know what is the number for the police station. We know where probably is the nearest policeman on the street, but we miss the same system in the cyber world. And definitely that cannot be developed from the users itself. The governments have to step up or step in the cyberspace and define the rules which enable us to increase the security not only in the physical world but in the cyber world. So cybersecurity is the threat, but definitely technology can solve that. And just the last comment to that, we should not feel that because of those threats, we should not really develop further. We should not use those technologies because it's the same like, let's say airline industry. Even though the potential accident causes much bigger damage than just falling from the bicycle, the benefits of the airline industry are much higher, and basically the risk on the statistical level is much lower. It's the same with technologies.
No, thank you very much. The mayor has to go now. If he doesn't, Prague will be switched off, and that will be the end of this meeting anyway. So thank you very much. So much. So that was very useful, and thank you. There was another question about the role of the church. I didn't fully understand the question, but the church obviously is an institution fundamental to the founding and the growth of our cities. I think we shouldn't ever forget that. Our cities in Europe began as temples to gods, and they grew again under the Christian religion through the construction of the church as the central forum in which people united and through which they rehearsed their common settlement in the place. And those churches are now empty. And that is a real question. And I think it also connects with, what does that mean for us? And it connects with this last issue about the transfer of our lives to cyberspace. Younger people do it, we oldies don't. But the more people transfer their lives to cyberspace, the less they are attached to a particular, specific place here on Earth, which is theirs. So, and I think you could connect these two things, that there is the old form of the city as a place of settlement where people worship the gods together and join in a celebration of their communities, are being replaced by these virtual communities which can come to Earth anywhere, and people likewise travel anywhere. And there is a question as to the extent to which people are now attached to their cities. I think Pablo did a beautiful job in showing how the city of Bilbao had tried to accommodate local communities and the local forms of settlement and make settlement into a reality again. And there is a question as to how we can do that without the use of the great spiritual legacy that our churches represent. Now, I will ask for a few more questions before we come back to that. So let's have some more questions, not necessarily from the same people. Are there some new people? There's a gentleman there, and another one over there. So.
Good morning, everyone. I am representing also technology. It's the Visa payment system. And of course that it has nothing to do with the city, but you will see that it has, because for every city the public transport infrastructure is very important. And we as Visa, we have invested a lot of money, and we are investing into development of public transport applications. And what Eva Irichna mentioned, that for example London is a best example of this. Because in London from November last year, you can use any payment card issued in any other country for standard transport. So no more paper tickets, no more Oyster card, which is something similar to Open Card, but not really similar. So that's the solution. And why it is important for us, because in the situation when the future of the open card here in Prague is discussed. So it's very important to find the right solution. And we do believe in Visa that the transport should provide transport, and that financial institutions should provide financial services, and it shouldn't be vice versa. So for your information, Czech Republic and Slovakia, which we do represent here, are in the 6 most developed countries from the contactless point of view. It is Spain, it's UK, Turkey, Poland, Czech Republic, and Slovakia. So I think that this connection between the development of the city, the transport infrastructure, and the payment system is something where we do see the future. So the new role of the card, payment card, which everyone has in his pocket, will be also the payment application. And I do believe that the transport system will save a lot of money and to invest it somewhere else. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. There was a gentleman over there.
Pavel Borecký. What I find really remarkable is that this panel is called Transforming Cities, but you put in the heart of this discussion people. So the most of you want to have a city people-oriented. And my question is how to empower the communities and how to use, in order to empower those communities, how to use social scientists. I missed this word and I missed this part of these experts. In your presentations there were technicians, but I think there are people who have kind of a soft skills, knowing how to deal with the people, how to let them participate, how to help them to join this bigger community, making cities at the end. So I want to bring your thoughts maybe closer to this sphere. And unfortunately, Mr. Hudeček is not here, and I wanted to ask him, maybe some of you might pick this question, how to support this development aiming to community councils. In New York, they have community councils. We miss it in Prague. How to make them in Prague? So this is my question and remark. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm assuming you are a social scientist, advertising yourself just in the way that Mr. Visa advertised his firm. So thank you. Your immediate neighbor, and then the lady here.
Good morning, my name is Jan Trnka from Charles University in Prague. My question is about the fragility of cities. You talked about the cities as the greatest achievement of humankind and that they are not a problem, they're a solution. But all the cities are quite fragile. The bigger they are, the more fragile they are. Because they require a lot of resources, they need water, they need electricity, they need food. Can you maybe comment on that, how to solve it, either using better governance or using better technology? Thank you.
Okay, that's a very big and interesting question. There's a lady here, I can't remember which one yes? Yeah.
Good morning, my name is Pavla Šmídová, and I wanted to ask more to the architects how to make the cities more tempting, more like the people would come here not as tourists, but to enjoy the city, to explore the city more, not to just see the monuments. So how to do Prague better, like comparing to Vienna, which is a big conference industry. So how to make Prague more tempting?
I'll take one more question from the lady here in front, yes? There's a microphone about to come to you.
My name is Irina Marizhantovska, and I am most recently of the Royal Institute of British Architects in London. I'm an architectural historian, and since nobody mentioned history in this discussion, I just wanted to suggest that perhaps engaging with history in appropriate ways is very much part of the future. One of the most interesting letters from Alice Masaryk to the architect Josef Plečnik during the transformation of the Prague Castle is a letter in which she's sitting at her desk saying that by sitting there and looking out on the gardens, she becomes aware of the city. By extension, she thinks about the country. And by thinking about the country, she connects with the world at large. I think that an analogy of that is entirely possible through deploying not just the skills, hard and soft, that we have been talking about, but also more of the historical knowledge and imagination in the terms of making the city interesting. And in aside to my colleague here, I just want to say that from my London experience at the Royal Institute, where we have worked a lot on engaging people with the issues of architecture and the city, people are fundamentally interested in people more than in buildings. And if you are able to introduce that element in presenting architecture and urban issues in Prague, I think that there is a good opportunity that a much greater number of those inside and out will become engaged. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a very urgent lady over there, yes, who obviously will have to be appeased. There.
So it's not a question, but I invite you to look at the Lobkowitz Palace upstairs. There are 2 paintings by Canaletto, London at the end of the 19th century. Try to count the churches. You can't. And how many churches in London today? That was my question.
Yes. As a Londoner, I have to say that I can't look at Canaletto's paintings of London without feeling that a temptation to weep. Because ours was a great city which of course was destroyed, partly destroyed by the Luftwaffe, but went on being destroyed until recent times. And it is complete, as Eva Jiřičná said, it's been completely transformed. It no longer is that thing that Canaletto painted. But anyway, it's a very controversial thing whether the changes are good or bad, but they've occurred, and therefore we have to live with them. We've had a lot of interesting questions here, and I think all of us would agree on this platform that what the gentleman from Visa said is right, that providing forms of payment for public transport which enable people just to get on a bus and go where they need to go would be wonderful. Here in Prague, not only do you need these ridiculous tickets, but it's a carefully guarded secret where you could find them. And when first arriving here, you spend a whole day in torment, knowing you're going to be at any moment arrested for traveling without one. No doubt the city makes more money from arresting innocent tourists for doing this than it would from selling tickets. But I think that's not the right procedure. So I think we'd all agree about that. The idea of people-oriented cities, this is extremely important. How do you incorporate the people into the city? And I think Pablo has said lots of things about this. Eva mentioned the city of Brasilia and the extraordinary fate of it. That having built this city with its pristine modernist forms, according to the aesthetic standards of the Bauhaus and subsequent builders, and nobody actually lives in it. How is it that people come to live in cities? And I think this is a question that everybody has to answer. Why do people flee from American cities into the suburbs and flock from the suburbs into Paris and Rome and Florence? It has something to do with the architecture. Perhaps Eva would like to say something about this.
Yes, we could spend the rest of the day and the rest of the months, I think, talking about it. Well, I think at the public participation, I feel really embarrassed to say that I don't know exactly what the process is here, but I think it is happening, as far as I can say, in London. This public participation in major architecture or even town planning decision is now really involving general public. So if I just give you a very short example, we are doing a little building in the historic, one of the historic centers of London. We have to put our project on the wall and for a week open the door to all the public audience, and anybody who comes in can ask the question And we have to make the comment available to the planning committee, so when they consider our planning application, it is involved. The second thing, I think that it's the other side of informing general public about architecture. There is something which is called the Sterling Prize. Sterling was an architect who left some money, which is allocated to awarding architectural prize every year to the best architectural building. That process is really taking into account lots of layers of the competition, regional, so from every single village, from every single town, people can select the best building, and it goes on into the final committee who visit the building. They don't need to be building only in England. It is just of really showing the architecture scope which the country is able to offer, or British architect can offer. I mean, it goes on television, and it kind of comes to media. Without it, people wouldn't know what famous architects or less famous architects and totally unfamous architects do, and how major improvement could happen in the middle of cities which you've never heard of, or a little village when a beautiful housing scheme is developed, or little monastery is built, which is at the moment, I think, at one of the most beautiful buildings of the present competition, done by an up-and-coming architect. I just think I would like to also mention the churches, if I may, because just to shorten up the discussion. We did the Faith Pavilion at 2000 exhibition, Millennium Exhibition in London. It is an extremely complicated issue. We had to produce design which would be then discussed with 52 religious representatives in London, and they were reduced from 92. 52 was a reduced number. So as architects, we just have approached a lot, and we just have said, is there anything which we have in common, which we can make as a common denominator of our pavilion, but everybody would feel at home? They asked me to leave the room. Half an hour later, I came back and they said, no, we decided that we are all specific groups of people and we don't want to be a part of the common mishmash. Well, that is difficult, so and that is why those little groups can't really maintain those churches and so on and so forth. As I'm saying, we could be here endlessly. I think that I stop because you want to give chances to other people to speak as well. So.
Well, thank you very much. No, it's very useful, actually. There was a question about the fragility of cities. How do we manage this? That means not just architectural fragility, but things like water, air, all those resources that people need in order to live in cities at all. And I think this is something which obviously Pablo is extremely aware of, and it would be nice if you could say something about how one copes with these very, very difficult questions of assuring resources for the future, assuring the sustainability of a city.
Yeah, when I said that, of course I believe in cities, and I believe in medium-sized cities. It's true that the bigger cities, the big cities are a problem, and I do not know how to handle. But apparently everybody wants to go to New York, to Peking, to London, and the only answer to that is to concentrate on the local. I think cities should focus, as I did in my presentation, on the districts and on the local, and try to create a really polycentrical city system. And of course, not only water, but energy is a main problem. We have to be much more aware. We are talking about sustainability as a mantra that will help resolve everything, but we are not, as I said about citizen participation, we are not really aware of the problem. We have to control the use of water, the use of electricity. We cannot even if we can afford it personally, we have to start thinking that the world cannot afford this. So there is a big question, starting from the politicians, after the technicians, and going to the other question. I say technician, I also said multidisciplinary, but I must confess I was not thinking on scientists, that's true. But I understand that each time we have to put in the design of the cities more people. And I also wrote about bringing young people. One thing that worries me is that the people that are designing the cities, we are very old. So we are designing cities for young people that we don't know what they want. Perhaps Jiří Deváth should become a planner because he knows. And this is another important question. So to end, I'm trying to answer to the attractivity, if you may, is that your question, lady, I think is more for a tourism expert. But from a planner point of view, I think we should make cities that we use the street. I like the European dense city where people use the streets, tourists use the streets, and even the tourists, they can wander on the streets and then discover things, no? Instead of just going to see one monument, other monument, and this is what we try to do, at least in Bilbao, to create a city where people can walk and then discover and not just going to visit things.
Thank you very much. Actually, these last two interventions they do raise this great question, which obviously people living in this city have to confront. What do you do with the mass movement of tourists? I think you asked the question, how to make the city more tempting, but as the other lady said, really you want to make it less tempting for the wrong types. We need people who do have a sense of history, and that is difficult. The only solution, as I see it, is to have an examination that people must pass before they're allowed to tour. To show that they have not only an interest in history, but sufficient knowledge, so you have more on-free crowds of tourists. But as it is, these hordes of uneducated people sweeping across a city like this won't do it any good. And it is, I don't know how to remedy this. I think one encouraging sign is that in Prague, people do expect the tourists to be interested in culture. Outside the churches, there are little notices always saying that we will perform, that there'll be a performance. Unfortunately, it's only 4 things that are ever performed: Vivaldi's Seasons, Mozart's Requiem, and a little bit of Dvorak thrown in. But, it's at least better than a pop concert. And, it may be if one just goes on insisting that Prague is a cultural center, is the heart of Europe, and it's interesting for its history above all, then maybe this, if you say this in an intimidating enough way, people will stay away. But that's the only solution I can see. Now, we have actually come to the end of our time, but if there is anybody with a really urgent, passionate need to intervene, how passionate and urgent are you? Yes? Okay, one last question.
Well, I just want to say thank you for this panel debate, because I think never said it before that architecture is very hard job, and I like it what you do, because it's a nice something what have a sense and what is beautiful, because especially that half island and Spanish and Portugal, there are so many beautiful buildings. I was in Valencia and I have been in Barcelona, and it was so beautiful, so nice. I think, oh my God, I saw just only in docs, and now I saw it, oh my God, I see it. It's so nice, and I say thank you for everything, and I hope it will be better and better.
Well, that's a very nice remark on which to end. I'll just ask the panelists if you have, I'll give you 1 minute each to say the thing that you really want to say that hasn't been said yet. So Jiří, 1 minute only.
Well, just rather a reflection from my side. Definitely I'm very passionate about the things, how the city can evolve with all the tools and means which we have, and that's great. And on the other side, the reflection which I have got from the audience is that there are tons of problems which are unsolved, which are before even we discuss the things how to connect the communities and so on. Starting with the morning jogging in the Prague and so on and so what. So my reflection on that is it's a long journey, and we have heard from Pablo that they are working on the new city already 3 decades, and it will continue maybe for 2 or 3 more. So it's long journey, and my emphasis would be just for the municipalities: get connected with your citizens, use the modern tools in the way that you are closer to your citizens. Then the problems can be solved more faster.
Thank you very much. Eva, would you like to give us a minute of your thoughts?
Yeah, I just thought there is one thing which I would like to mention, which is the public and private initiative. Yes, we can talk about big projects and changing the cities, but as the lady mentioned, how we are going to make our city more town of Prague more appealing. It really comes from the detail, what we can do. And I have to say, you know, mentioning, for example, all the Spanish cities, starting from Barcelona, Seville, and so on and so forth. You look inside the little courtyards and you see a beautiful green little garden, a little courtyard. You may not be able to access it, but at least you don't see a bin full of rubbish. And I think that when I come from London, I really suffer when I walk through, because our office is just by the Charles Bridge. You know, the amount of rubbish which is everywhere in the street, and nobody seems to pay any attention where the bins should be, where, you know, so the pleasant experience of the city comes again from the detail. If I have to walk for my morning coffee next to the rubbish bins and so on and so forth, it's not the best thing to do the first thing in the morning. But there are lots of things which people can do. I live in London, in Westminster, and Westminster just allocates a certain amount of money for the landscape. I can't tell you what difference it makes to have a nice little pot of beautiful flowers greeting you every morning. And that is what people don't abuse. You know, when we did various projects like, I don't know, transportation project, the minute you give people something nice and greenery, they usually don't abuse it if they feel that it's their own, if they contribute to it. Yes, you have to protect it against the tourists, but it's all education. Maybe they damage it once or twice, but I think that it is, you know, what we can each of us do ourselves with few little friends, and then it goes on, and then the public money might actually contribute as well if they see any sense of doing so.
No,
maybe from political reasons, but let be it.
That was 3 minutes.
Oh.
But nevertheless, even though we've run out of time, I'll allow Pablo to have exactly 1 minute.
I have one growing fear about cities is, and it's due mainly because of all the bureaucracy. Our cities are becoming very rigid, and I think that we need in the future more flexibility to do what Gire Debat says, to be able, in one word or two or three, is that what is good in one occasion cannot be good in another. And now, at least in Spain, the regulation force that everybody, we used to say it's coffee for everybody, and this do not work, because in some occasion, young people have to gather. In other occasion, there is a special event, and this should be feasible, and our cities are becoming too rigid.
Thank you very much. Well, I think you'll all agree this has been an extremely interesting panel, and it has left us with more questions than answers, I suspect. But what has been impressive to me is the extent to which people in the audience are clearly committed to the city and to living in it. So thank you, the audience, for being so productive and stimulating such an interesting discussion. Join me, please, in thanking our speakers, including the absent mayor. Thank you very much. That was very useful.